Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Michael Olmsted, and I am the Global Head of Corporate Partnerships for Plug and Play. I am honored to introduce our two guests for today's Fireside Chat, but before I do that, I'd like to set context for the next hour and give a brief introduction about Plug and Play and how our partnership with the Alliance to End Plastic Waste came together to form one of the most amazing initiatives of our company's history. Plug and Play is the largest global innovation platform, running over 50 accelerator programs across 30 cities and 15 countries, working with over 300 corporate partners to fuel their external innovation strategies, and investing in over 250 seed to Series B stage startups per year. Our goal is to really help the world progress through innovation and connection. And for this to happen, we fundamentally believe innovation needs to be open to anyone and anywhere. This approach and mentality has allowed us to build a network that extends far beyond Silicon Valley. And over the last 15 years, we've built an innovation platform that now provides access and visibility to new markets for all of our key stakeholders. Through our 18 themed innovation platforms, we facilitate engagement between these key stakeholders, our startups, our corporate partners, our co-investors, government entities, and today we highlight our End Plastic Waste innovation platform. With humble beginnings dating back to Palo Alto in the early 1990s, our founder and Fireside Chat host, Saeed Amidi, was able to house, invest in, and accelerate companies like Google, Logitech, PayPal, and Danger in his lucky building. This early success has propelled us into our present day, where we are now proud to have over 1,000 portfolio companies, 1% of which have reached over $1 billion in valuation. Companies like Honey, Dropbox, Lending Club, Rappi, N26, and Guardant Health, just to name a few of the unicorns. In addition to working with and investing in these startups, we're very proud to serve more than 300 of the world's largest corporations by connecting them with those very same startups to address their key business challenges. And in many ways, our deep roster of clients and corporate partners and long-standing relationships with companies like ExxonMobil, Procter & Gamble, and PepsiCo really paved the way for our partnership with the Alliance to End Plastic Waste. And in February of this year, I'm proud to say we kicked off our relationship with the Alliance. Now, the Alliance to End Plastic Waste is a not-for-profit organization working to make the dream of a world without plastic waste a reality. It is comprised of over 50 of the largest companies across the plastics value chain, from resin suppliers to energy and chemical companies, CPGs and recycling companies, and more. As a key element of Plug and Play's overall sustainability effort, our partnership with the Alliance has led to the End Plastic Waste Innovation Platform. And over the next 2 years, we will run 6 accelerator programs across 3 global hubs, Silicon Valley, Paris, and Singapore, with ambitions to expand into additional locations in the years to come. Each program is a 90-day, highly structured curriculum that will accelerate the highest potential startups tackling plastic waste. And following a rigorous selection process, where a panel of member companies, which you can see on the left from the Alliance, select 10 startups to join each program and work closely with the member companies to help end plastic waste once and for all. We invite any companies tuning in, startups, or corporations to please reach out if they have interest in the platform. Now, we've set the context for our viewers. I hope they understand Plug and Play, the Alliance, and our partnership. Now allow me to introduce our 2 esteemed guests, Saeed Amidi and Jacob Duer, to hear how each of their unique journeys has led them to partnering up in the critical effort to end plastic waste. To kick it off, Saeed, I'd love for you to share with the audience a little bit about your background, specific to the plastics industry and how you got your start, and then I'll let you take it from there. And as a reminder to all of the audience and viewers that we have at home, please know that you can ask questions via the Q&A box in the middle, and I'll be happy to field those questions throughout the conversation. Saeed, over to you.
Thank you so much, Mike. It's a great pleasure to host Jacob, but to set a little bit of the stage, you know, I emigrated to US in mid-70s, and I was planning to return home to Iran to join the family business, which also included plastic, polyethylene, polypropylene, polyurethane. But in 1979, as many people know, we had a little revolution in Iran, and my plans changed. And in the Lucky Building, I started a little company called Chemtex, and I was planning to do import, export in almost anything I could succeed in. But by coincidence, one of my early shipments was 400 metric tons of high-density polyethylene blow molding to produce edible oil bottles in Saudi Arabia, Saudi vegetable oil and ghee. Then through the years, Chemtex grew, and we exported about 10,000 tons of high-density polyethylene per month, mainly from ExxonMobil, but occasionally from Dow, Chevron, and other members of Alliance. I used to say, you know, the material that I ship primarily to Mexico for oil, edible oil, milk, and juice bottles produces about 10 million bottles per day. And I'm kind of lucky because in Mexico, we recycle around 75% of those bottles. But coming around full circle, I am super excited in the year 2020 to spend at least 30% of our time, effort, together with Jacob, you know, and Alliance to End Plastic Waste and other sustainability initiatives to really make a positive impact in the world. And I say that, you know, in the last 20 years that I have focused on technology, in helping to invest in technology and have them scale, I hope to be able to apply that same process with the Alliance members to take the best ideas, filter them, and then when they make economical sense and they reduce plastic waste, to scale them to a global scale and make our world cleaner, our oceans cleaner. And again, it's been an incredible privilege that Alliance chose Plug and Play to run these 3 original initiatives. But I am hoping and planning that this is just the tip of the iceberg. So with that introduction from me, and again, if I can summarize it, I am still in plastic business. If time allows, I will tell you a little bit about my bottled water business, which also uses a lot of plastic, that we reuse the bottles for 2 years, and then we recycle it 100%. But this is supposed to be a fireside chat with Jacob. So I would love, Jacob, if you tell me a little bit about your early days, where you grew up, where you studied, and what was your journey to sustainability? And then I will interrupt you and ask more questions.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Saeed, and thank you very much to Plug and Play for the excellent cooperation and partnership that we have established. And I can only say from the side of the Alliance, we're equally excited about the cooperation, and not only what we have done, but what we are going to do together in ending plastic waste in the environment. So very interesting to hear about your background, and in many ways I come into it from a slightly different perspective, but our goal is the same. And I think this is the importance of partnerships and cooperation across all the different stakeholders. So I'm originally from Denmark. I grew up in Denmark, and I went to university in Denmark where I studied economics, and in many ways was sort of supposed to end up in working in a finance department in a bank. But towards the end of my studies, I sort of felt that I want to do more. I want to have a job that can contribute to a more safer and a cleaner world. And that was the reason why I ended up with the United Nations, where I have spent 23 years working in different UN organizations, living in different parts of the world, including 10 years in Africa, where I've spent time in West Africa and Senegal. I've spent significant time in East Africa and Kenya, and all around in the last 17 years on protecting the environment, creating a more sustainable future for the planet and for the generations to come. And it's also from that angle that I'm coming into the Alliance to End Plastic Waste, because plastic waste in the environment today is one of our biggest environmental challenges, but also I think in many ways one of our biggest opportunities. And what also distinguishes maybe that topic from some of the other environmental challenges that the world is faced with today, that this is a problem that we can relatively easily fix. And it can be done in our lifetime, and it can be done with the right investments, with the right technology, and with the right commitments from the private sector, from governments, from civil society, and from intergovernmental organizations. So I joined the Alliance to End Plastic Waste only 6 months ago in October, and since then a lot has happened for me, both personally and professionally. Not only have I relocated from Geneva in Switzerland, where I was working for the United Nations most recently, to Singapore, where we're standing up the organization right now, but also at the level of the Alliance, because we are in many ways just a startup. The difference is we are a startup that has $1 billion of commitments already, and it does make it, I wouldn't say easy, but it gives us a bit of a base where we can start from in terms of getting activities off the ground. So I'm coming into this with a very interesting and hopeful and optimistic viewpoint to, if we get the right technology, if we get the right people around in developing solutions, we will, in our lifetime, see an end to plastic waste in the environment.
Wonderful. If Mike mentioned, we work with Mercedes, we work with Chrysler, Fiat, we work with ExxonMobil, but somehow, as we are talking to the same people, specifically about environment, sustainability, and plastic waste, I feel more passion or more energy around the subject. And quite frankly, the money and the commitment needs a little bit more passion to expedite what is in front of us. And I'm so happy you mentioned in our lifetime, because when I talk to the next generation, the most important thing in their life is the environment. And I remember when I was at my daughter's age, Sophie, I was just interested to playing, making money and traveling, but majority of the people who are in their early 20s, the environment is their biggest concern. And I wanted to ask you, I know United Nations is incredible organization and you serve them in Africa, but how can we apply what you have learned and what I have learned in the technology world to implement this task that we have in front of us?
So you're absolutely right. The environmental agenda is the most important topic, I think, of the generations that are younger than ours. I mean, when I talk to my kids, they come home and they talk environment, they talk about ecosystems, words that I didn't even know existed at the time that I grew up. And it has become an integral part of where they see their future in terms of their own education, but also where everyone wants to contribute. And I think if we are looking at plastic waste in the environment, it's much more than an environmental topic. It's become a movement where everyone feels that they can contribute to being part of the solution. We can all make an effort to make sure that the waste that we generate as part of our daily consumption, that does not end up in the environment. I think the whole awareness around consumption and the related production is something that is being almost integrated into the educational systems today. What I see as one of the challenges, and also what brought me to join the Alliance to End Plastic Waste, is there is still a gap between the policy world, which set, let's say, regulation, policy frameworks, the foundation that we in many ways need in society, and that are important, and the area where I have spent a lot of my time in the last many years. But there is a gap between where the solutions lie, and that is with the private sector, where the investments needs to come from, and that is with the private sector. And that's why I think the Alliance to End Plastic Waste so interesting, because that fills in many ways that gap between regulation and policymakers and the solution and the investors. And the Alliance wants to fill that gap and connecting the two worlds. None of the two worlds can solve the problem alone. They have to work and come together hand in hand, because their objective at the end of the day is exactly the same. So when we engaging, and where I bring in my skill set, having worked and negotiated a number of very, very complex issues with governments over the years, is to create that platform, that place where we can convene the different actors, not only in identifying the solutions, but also de-risking them and then scaling them. So maybe just to give you an example, I mean, we already, although we are relatively young as an organization, we've already launched a number of projects. We have 14 projects that have been approved by our executive committee and board, and we are active in a number of countries in Asia and the Pacific, which is our focus area right now, recognizing that 80% of the plastic pollution is coming from this region. But what we are seeing is that there are many demonstration projects out there. There are many pilot projects out there that are interesting and that shows results. But very often these projects, they end there. They are not connected to organizations like your own, where resources, where finance and new ideas are being incubated and coming from. And we want to make that connection, because at the end of the day, if we want to make a real impact, we have to make sure that the good ideas, and that's why our partnership with Plug and Play is so exciting for us, that they are tested and trialed, that they are invested in, that they are de-risked and ultimately brought out there to the much bigger, let's say, arena where investments needs to take place. And that's not only from, the private sector companies, that's not only from our member companies, but that's also from private equity, that's from venture capital. And we are in a number of conversations also with some of the very big development banks, from the Asian Development Bank that's operating here in this region, the Asian Infrastructure and Investment Bank. And they're all sitting there and saying, we are sitting with a large amount of resources. And here we are talking billions of dollars to addressing the issue of marine litter, of plastic waste in the environment. But what they're longing for are solutions. They're saying, but we need solutions to invest in. We need solutions that have been in many ways tested and trialed and de-risked, so that they know when they go in there and invest that it doesn't come with a big, let's say, risk associated with it. So if we can be that connector between yourself in many ways, that's the incubator and the inventor, if we can then invest in those, de-risk them, and then work with the ones that have the real big money, then we can have the impact that I'm talking about. And then we can move away from good demonstration and pilot projects to large, strategic, impactful programs that really can make a difference and put an end to plastic waste in the environment.
And Jacob,
Wonderful.
just as a
Go ahead,
follow-up,
Mike.
just as a follow-up to that, I mean, what we found so fascinating is the fact you were able to bring together so many stakeholders, not just corporates, right? I mean, we're talking about partnering with finance community, the government and civil society, environmental and economic development, NGOs. And when you have so many groups that have a common goal, it still must be somewhat challenging to find alignment about how to get there. And I'm just curious about the structure of your organization and how those decisions get made. In our experience, you guys have moved very quickly. Considering you're working with some of the biggest companies in the world, I've been fascinated by how agile you are despite your size. And so I'd be curious, and the audience would be curious to know kind of how you orchestrate all of that coming together.
So as you rightly pointed out, I mean, we are composed of some of the biggest companies in the world. And one of the areas that makes the Alliance quite unique is that our membership represents the full value chain, right? As you outlined in the beginning. So that's the chemicals and the petrochemicals industry. It's brands and retailers, it's converters, it's recyclers, and it's waste management companies. And I think it's the only space and the only platform where they're actually coming together in one group, investing in the same objective, ending plastic waste in the environment. And what that does for us, and I'm almost sort of figuratively speaking here, we are able to bring them together literally around the table in bringing in solutions, bringing in the perspectives, the technical know-how and knowledge of each of these member companies into creating solutions that feeds and meets the objectives of the entire plastic value chain. And it's going back to no one can do it alone. No single company can do it alone. No single sector can do it alone, only joining forces. And it's not about chipping into the same in terms of money, but it's technical know-how and expertise that also needs to be joined. But doing so also needs the partnership of others. So we are working with UN agencies. We are developing partnerships with the United Nations Development Program in terms of ending plastic waste in the environment. We are working with the United Nations Habitat, so focusing on urban issues, recognizing that a lot of the plastic pollution and waste challenges around plastic waste is in cities. We are working with the Asian Development Bank. And all our projects that are being rolled out, at the national level and in communities, that's being implemented by our executing partners, which is civil society. But in order to have the real impact, we still need to work with governments. And so we're engaging with governments, in particular in Southeast Asia. And we'll also be working in China and India. I think the advantage that we have is it's a very complex issue, the plastics conversation. It's a very broad issue, and it's a very emotional issue in many ways. We all have a viewpoint on it. Our focus is on plastic waste in the environment. So our scope is actually quite narrow. And I think that helps us in guiding the conversation, but it also helps us in contributing to the conversation in the broader plastic value chain, where there's so many actors and there are so many operators. We may not be active there in terms of our direct investments, but what we believe that we can do is, through the experience that we are having from our work around plastic waste and integrated waste management systems, recycling, et cetera, we can actually contribute to a much more nuanced conversation, and then ultimately contribute to a circular economy around plastic, and ultimately contribute to closing the loop. But cooperation is a challenge, coming from the United Nations, having worked with 195 member states, on very, very complex issues. It's a challenge, but it's also fascinating. And when you get them around a topic, and then you get our different actors aligned around a solution, then we're starting to see the movement. And, this is driven by, going back to your word, Saeed, this is driven by passion. It is driven by commitment and wanting to do a difference or make a difference.
So it would be not correct to not talk about this challenge that we are going through globally right now with COVID-19. I recall when I was having a talk with Mayor Park of Seoul, Korea, and quite frankly, I don't know many high-level people in Taiwan, but they addressed the issue heads-on. They executed well. And also, I must say, in China, I am in touch with many of our offices and our people. And today I had the confirmation that airlines are 50% running. Manufacturing is higher than 85% production. They still have supply chain issues. But specifically, I wanted to ask you, Jacob, is there like the urgency of how FDA is approving drugs right now? Is there something we could learn from, like, again, I Zoom from 7 o'clock in the morning to 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and we've been able to be connected to people, to implement ideas, even startups, connecting them to our corporation, everything now online. Is there something we can learn from this challenging time that we can use in Alliance to End Plastic Waste? Is there any comparison? First, I was really kind of, I could say, upset because sustainability became second to COVID-19, rightfully so, because health of the people is involved, economical challenges are involved. But is there something we can learn from that?
So like anyone in the world, we are also impacted, from COVID-19. And, to be very honest as well, it's a bit of a challenge, to work from home at a time when you're building and creating a new organization, standing it up, recruiting people. So we have actually been recruiting and onboarding staff that we have never had a chance to meet in person, simply because of the fact that we have not been able to move outside our home or our workspace. And some of the colleagues that we have recruited have not been able to travel yet. So like everyone, COVID is having an impact on our ability. But at the same time, I think for us, what we have seen during COVID is, of course, that there has been a significant increase in terms of protective equipment and the necessity of plastic-related materials in the health sector and elsewhere. And I think for us, it has just underlined the importance of what we are doing, and that circumstances like COVID or any other, let's say, development issue or challenging issue that the world is facing is going back to sustainability. Right? While it may have a bit of a lower focus right now, and that's understandable, and as you put it, also right, I think when we are coming out of the COVID situation and coming out of the COVID challenges, we are going to see sustainability come back, I wouldn't say tenfold, but with an equal, if not a higher importance. What we have seen, just, because our focus is on waste management, there has been more than a 5-doubling of the waste from the health sector, generated in the last few months, simply because of the increased use of PPE. I was reading an article the other day, from Thailand, right, where there has been a almost 6-fold increase in the plastic use during the COVID period per day. And the reason is that people are from home. They are at home, right? So they're not able to go out. So there's a lot of deliveries being, sort of delivery services are, at the disposal. So all the food that gets delivered, and that's in plastic material. That's one thing. But I think the biggest challenge here is that the same waste that generates because of very often not having the waste management infrastructures in place, that waste is ending up in the environment. So I think our work has been highlighted as being absolutely fundamental. I think we will have an increased demand and focus, and the expectations will be even higher around our work in the Alliance as we come out, hopefully positively at the end of the tunnel from the COVID situation. So I can only say, I mean, while we may be not implementing our projects as fast as we had hoped during this particular time, we are gearing up to the time then when we can come back. We are working very closely with our partners in Indonesia and in Vietnam, in India and Thailand, where we have ongoing projects, and we are lining up the start of new projects also in these countries. So my optimistic mind tells me that in a few months from now, we will be back on the ground. The staff from the Alliance will be back working with our partners, and we will, by the end of the year, start to see more impact of our work.
Yeah, you know, the part that I believe it could be a learning and urgency in sustainability is no matter what we do in this world, we are all connected. And similar to this COVID-19 that doesn't recognize borders, I believe plastic waste doesn't recognize borders. And we need to have a global solution to this global challenge. And another thing that at least I would like to learn from it is hopefully executing fast. You know, specifically in what we do in different verticals, when we identify a great technology, great team, market, product fit, we sort of raise the A round and, you know, get to unit profitability, not corporate profitability. But you say, okay, at the unit cost, are you break even or profitable? Then you scale it. And that is what from my 40 years in plastic business, other than, you know, like people who Procter and Gamble, Pepsi, everybody else who runs incredible efficient businesses, we need to bring that efficiency to recycling and really scale this business. And again, I wanted to throw you a curveball, Jacob, instead of easy question. You talked about, you know, waste, and I can tell you in my house, while my wife was still with me, she just went to Europe, but we used to receive 3 boxes a day. Now that she's not here, we receive 2 boxes a day. Has Amazon, Rakuten, you know, like these Walmart.com, to name a few, have they engaged with you? Because I work with them in other sectors like supply chain, but I really feel that is a great opportunity. What is your thoughts, or what is, I'm sure you're receiving a lot of packages every day too.
Absolutely. And, you know, going back to our children, they're saying every single time, why are we receiving all this, right? And because that has become in many ways, and I think that's interesting as well, right? That has become the new way of shopping, right, across the world. And we saw that. And what was interesting, maybe as an anecdote, the whole e-commerce, if you're looking at China, at least, that happened actually sort of was ignited by under the SARS situation, right? When that happened, that was when all these companies actually started to really grow and become influential in terms of gaining share in the market space, you know, JD.com, Alibaba and others, right? And I think what you are seeing right now under the COVID situation is exactly the same. The fact that we cannot go out and do shopping in shops, we are increasingly, you know, dependent and relying on services that are being delivered to us. So I mean, I can say that, the companies that you are mentioning here, Amazon, Walmart, JD.com, and I would add Alibaba and others, they are indeed companies that we are engaging with and are in conversations with around joining the alliance. We see them as a very important player within the plastic value chain, including from a waste management and circularity perspective. And we believe that they can and should be part of the solutions that we are generating. I mean, I would love, and throwing that back to you, maybe Saeed, I would love to use this platform as well and our excellent cooperation with Plug and Play to expand our network as well, right? We are a global alliance, and these are actors that are acting and operating at the global level as well, right? And they would be important. And we believe also can be part of creating those solutions that we so much are looking for. And some of the projects that I'm sure that are coming through your platform as well, they're also linked to, online shopping and the work of the Amazons and the Alibabas of this world. And if we can get them on, and we are in good conversations with a few of them, let me also be transparent around that. And we are hoping that, in the near future that we can make a few very positive announcements. As we go ahead and as we grow as an alliance, I mean, our aim is to grow our membership significantly. We have, almost 50 today, and that's a doubling from what we had just 1 year ago. And those almost 50 companies, they have committed $1 billion to the cause of the alliance. And our objective is to grow that budget. 1.5 is our $1 billion is our initial target. But as we grow the membership, the budget will not be our limitation. We are looking at 100, 150, 200 members over the next few years. And in order, again, to have a real impact, we need the big players in there. Because this is not only about what the alliance is doing. As I said earlier, it's also about what do we learn from the alliance and how can our member companies take that learning back into their own business models, back into their own, future business models, because sustainability is an area and a topic that has come to stay. I was at a very interesting CEO summit in the margins of the UN General Assembly in September last year, where you had some of the CEOs from some of the even bigger companies, in the world, and they were all talking about sustainability vis-a-vis, shareholder value. And for many of them, they see sustainability at the very top of what they set as their priority. Shareholder value obviously is critical, but if they don't project and invest in sustainable solutions, the shareholder value is not going to continue at the same pace. And at the same time, going back to talking about our kids, right? Many of the younger generation, they want to be associated with enterprises and companies that invest in sustainable solutions because they do care about the environment. And I think that's a very interesting observation as well. In order to retain and attract talent, member companies and companies in general are starting to see that sustainability and the sustainability practices and priorities of these companies, which is what we are seeing our member companies putting a lot of emphasis and priority to, is part of who they can retain and attract. So it's a much more complex agenda than just, plastic waste in the environment, but it is linked to earnings and income in a much bigger picture. And we want to be part of that. And I think we can contribute to that conversation. And what I think is so exciting is that companies seize it and they want to drive it. And our member companies, we see them as the leaders in this field.
If I can little bit compare this to the automotive industry that is going autonomous, electrical, and connected, you kind of need the whole value chain involved. I mean, like specifically in transportation with shared automotive, with shared mobility, you need the whole participation from everybody. And when we talk about our platforms, we say we would like the universities to be involved, the technology from entrepreneurs and the startup corporation, as you said, private equity, VC funding, and large global banks. And then I always tell our audience, this platform is not plug and place platform, and it is yours as much as it is ours. So I would love to invite our audience that are interested to get involved, to get involved with Alliance to End Plastic. Sometimes when we have this fireside chat, when we finish, I say, what was our ask? Quite frankly, this is a big project, and as many people, as many large or medium-sized corporations that are passionate about this cause, if they get involved, I think we will be better off. And I'm sorry, Mike, what did you wanted to say? Because I keep cutting you off.
So we're getting lots of questions from the audience. So I'm going to try to combine a few for you, Jacob. You talked about sustainable solutions, and obviously we're seeing a ton of them come through our partnership, the End Plastic Waste Innovation Platform. We're looking at startups creating things around waste collection, mechanical and chemical recycling, upcycling, waste materials exchange, river pollution. But we also know that plastic does serve a function, right? In many ways, it helps us, right? It increases shelf life of meat by 50 days, vegetables by a couple of weeks. And, just wondering how you reconcile that and what role policy will play. And I know that's your background, and what role policy will play in ultimately helping to end plastic waste, knowing that it does have, a very important value to society, even though there's all these great solutions out there. This is 3 questions or so combined. So,
and 3 good questions, but not easy, with easy answers attached to it. I mean, plastic does serve a purpose, right? And I think everyone, no matter who you are, does recognize that. And and it serves a purpose for different reasons depending on where you are in the world as well, right? Whether you live in the US, or you live in Denmark, or whether you live in a developing country, right? So I think we need to recognize that there will be and continue to be use of plastic as we move ahead. What we have seen is that the growth in the plastic use has not been, sort of coupled with the need for a growth in the systems that are required to manage the associated waste, right? And that challenge is only going to be bigger as we move ahead. We project a 2 billion, increase in the global population over the next X number of years. We will see an increase in urbanization, people moving into cities where there will be more consumption, including consumption that's related to plastic. We will see a growth in the middle class of billions over the next few years, in particular in low and middle income, economies and countries. And that all comes with increased use, increased demands for services. And many of these services are associated with plastic, right? So while there are a lot of efforts looking at addressing that part of it, at the end of the day, the plastic that's being consumed, whether that's in the construction industry, whether that's in the textile industry, whether that's true in the health sector, whether that's in the food sector, in any sector for that matter, that has to be managed at the time of its after its use, if I can put it in that way. And that's where we believe that's the weakest link today. And that's where no investments, or not sufficient investments, has gone in until now. So we need to make sure that we capture that one, so that the rest of the value chain actually is being optimized increasingly. But if we don't optimize the waste part of it, we will not be able to address the much bigger problem around pollution and environmental impact. Secondly, I think linked to that is policy making. And indeed, I'm coming from a policy background and have worked, on developing both legally binding instruments and voluntary policy frameworks. I think policy is important. I think it can take us far in addressing some of the environmental challenges and that the world is faced with. But I think in all honesty, have seen that it has its limitations, right? It is not taking us necessarily over the line in finding the solutions that requires investments, technology, and new ideas. And, and all of it is around innovation. And that's why I think it's so important to couple the two. It's not either or, but it's both. But they need to go hand in hand as we move forward. because ultimately policy is working towards addressing an environmental issue around plastic and plastic waste in the environment. Our work and the work of the many actors out there, in the plastic waste, in the plastic value chain, it's also about plastic and plastic waste in the environment. But if we are not joined in our common endeavors, we are not going to have the impact that we are looking toward. But one can't do it. And what we don't want to see is, we don't want to see the two worlds or the multiple worlds out there either competing or working against each other. And that's why that conversation and bringing and creating that space of convening is absolutely critical. So again, I hope that the Alliance, and I wish the Alliance, and I want the Alliance to play that space, because it's a unique space, and we can do that because we can bring those actors, because the commitment is there, political commitment, the investment is there from the private sector right now, and that we haven't seen to that extreme. We haven't seen 47 companies coming together in 12 months and raising $1 billion. I don't think you can find any other area where that has happened in such a short period and span of time. And that's what we need to capitalize on, because that's when we get the impact. And that's when we will have the pull in getting more on board from all the different stakeholders that are acting out there.
And as a follow-up to that, we understand that policy is important, these solutions are important, but we also understand individual markets have different needs as well as differing policy. And when we talk about global solutions, it's very difficult for a lot of the audience to understand how it's possible with those things competing. Different solutions needed for different markets, different policy in those markets. Is there a future where there will be a global standard as it relates to certain policy, or do you envision that?
Jacob, may I use an example, because this is a little bit like a fireside chat. Originally, for clean energy and solar and wind, things were subsidized. And specifically, I remember for big solar farms, there was special incentive that government would pay for the portion of the cost. But right now, I believe the last graphs I see, solar and wind is cheaper to produce electricity than coal. So I think Jacob talked about, when we start a solution for food packaging or construction material, we used to not think about the waste. We used to mainly think about the capabilities, shelf life, how good it looks, branding, color. But I believe the world has changed. And if from the beginning of the development of the product, we have the waste as part of the solution, I think it will be implementable. Because when we were going to clean electricity, it was like a daunting task. But now it has happened. With that, Jacob, how do you compare that industry with our industry? And do you think it's asking Mike's question with a little bit of parallel to solar?
I mean, I think in many ways we are fortunate, because we can learn from the experience of the past in the renewable energy world, and what has happened then. As you also rightly pointed out, this is a space where there has been a lot of subsidies, going into innovation and new ideas and trying to move towards a more renewable energy based world and society. I think waste is not waste. And I think that's also one of the messages that we want to convey. Waste has value, and that's not only plastic waste, but any waste for that matter, in reality, has a value attached and associated with it. The reality is, if we're just looking at plastic waste, that value today is estimated at between 80 and $120 billion. And that value is not being captured. Right? That ends up in the environment, because that's what we see on the beaches around the world, or in our oceans, or where we are operating, or it can end up in incineration. And we believe it's important, not only to prevent the leakage, but to bring that value back into the chain. And that's why the recycling part is so critical as well, whether we are talking advanced recycling, whether we are talking mechanical recycling. And I think that's also the realization in the energy sector, right? That was what was required to be subsidized in the beginning is now becoming an area where subsidies are less important, but where huge investments from the private sectors is coming in, right? And from individuals, venture capital. And I think we have maybe jumped the subsidy side of it in terms of investments into innovative solutions in addressing integrated waste management systems, but gone straight to getting the private sector, venture capital and investors in the broader sense to come in here. It is a global problem, as you also outlined earlier, Saeed, in terms of, plastic waste has no boundaries in terms of borders, right? A lot of what ends up in the ocean comes from all parts of the world, right? It's being transported through river systems into the ocean, and it doesn't stop where there is a border, just, similar to COVID. But at the same time, while we can have, from a policy perspective, looking at global policies, I think at the end of the day, many of the solutions needs to be not only national, but potentially even local solutions, right? The situation is very different, in a community in Indonesia or in Vietnam or in Thailand or anywhere else where we are seeing a lot of leakage of plastic waste into the environment. But there are similarities that we can learn from, right? So our learnings in one place can be replicated or scaled in another place. But it's ultimately, it is local solutions that we need to find and putting in place integrated waste management systems. Standards or not standards, it's a challenging question. It's a policy question in many ways, and the requirements in terms of plastic waste or plastic is different depending on the circumstances of a community or a country or a region. I think one of our messages is across the value chain is, in order to ensure that the value is retained, we need to ensure that what's being put on the market has a certain value, right? So that it can be brought back into the system. We see that with PET in terms of plastic bottles. That system works, largely and quite well because there's an economic value and understanding around that value of a plastic bottle, right? So there are systems that have emerged over many years that have come in place. So when we do our analysis, when we work with our partners, we don't find a lot of PET bottles in the waste, because that has become, a well-known fact that can be brought back in mechanical recycling and you get it back into the system. But there's so much other plastic that's being used in our daily life, and all that also has value, right? But that has not been, that's not necessarily a common knowledge around, with many of us. And I think, so one of our focus areas, beyond finding the technical solutions, investing in innovation, right, we also want to engage with the communities. So we are having a significant focus on engagement and education, where we want to work with communities around the importance of waste management at the household level, right? The importance of, of sorting and when you're at home, you need two buckets. You need one bucket for your for your plastic waste in any household, and then you need another bucket or two or three, depending on where you are in the world, for the other type of waste, right? And if we can start educating and bringing people on board and, around waste is not waste, but waste has a value, and there's a value for the community and for the individual household associated with that, then I think we are starting to see something that is interesting and really can make a difference. And these are the local solutions, but they will have a global impact, right? So if we in a small community can find a solution to that, with 300,000, 500,000, 1 million people, well, whatever amount of plastic waste that otherwise would have ended up in the environment, ultimately in the rivers, and most at the end of the day also in the oceans, then we are starting local solutions actually do bring national, regional, and global impacts. And again, we need to think about it in that way. So policies can take us, only so far. They are important, and I think they will always be an important part of a foundation for how society operates in any area. But at the same time, it is communities, it's individuals, it's local solutions that needs to be developed, and they need to go hand in hand, not compete, but they need to go hand in hand, because ultimately, only if we do that can we reach the end goal.
That's right.
I think you are absolutely right. I use the solar, but PET bottles and aluminum cans are doing so much better job than the rest of the plastic industry. And, you know, those are easy adoptable habits. You know, I don't know, I think like aluminum cans for even beverages, I have heard is recycled close to 70%, 75%. So those are really parallel distribution channel. But, you know, if I always like to sort of talk positive, when do you think we can look back, or I can look back and say, I throw a number, I always say in 5 years, what Plug and Play does, we would like to see 10% reduction of plastic waste. And people tell me, Saeed, where did you get that number from? I said, I just got it from the air. But I really think if we, like I invested in a company last week that does the digital identity of any product. And then you could follow it through the life cycle, through the waste cycle. And I'm hoping that they will implement it for plastics. Right now is for mostly batteries, automotive batteries and everything. But we're going to take a lot of technologies from other industries and adopt it for this. But let's say if you were, as I believe you are like me, very optimistic, where do we want to be in 2025? I will not hold you to it, even though we are videotaping this. But I want especially for younger generation, say, we're going to look back and we're going to be proud of what has been established. Do you try to set these goals?
Yes, we do. Let me put it, and I'm smiling because it's a difficult conversation, right? You know, in terms of how high do you go in terms of your ambition, and you know, how quickly can you generate and make the change happen on the ground, because there's so many factors that needs to be taken into consideration. But let me throw out a few numbers, and I'm glad to hear that you won't hold me accountable for them. But and I hope anyone else may not do that either. No, I'm joking here, of course. But I mean, we are looking at you know, in the next 5 years to prevent at a minimum that 3 million metric tons of plastic waste leaks into the environment. You know, and you know, a number is a number, and you know, what does that mean? I mean, 3 million metric tons, that's a lot. Let me put it in that way, right? And that's what we are working towards. And this is what we can do, what we believe we can do as an alliance together with our member companies. But it's also what we believe that our investments will catalyze in terms of projects elsewhere, right? So there's only so much that $1 billion can take us to in terms of activities. But if we get the right activities, if we de-risk them, and if we find the right solutions, then the investment of others will come in. And we want to measure our impact also through what can we do in terms of leveraging resources from elsewhere. But I think for us, it goes well beyond also saying, you know, X number of million metric tons of plastic waste leaking into the environment. It's also about people. It's also about cities in which, and communities in which these people are living. So we are hoping and targeting, saying through our interventions, we will have a positive impact on more than 130 million people on this planet, right? People that are living in communities right now where plastic is, you know, prominent in their surroundings and in their immediate environment. And we believe that we can provide a more sustainable livelihood to these communities if we can help preventing the leakage of plastic waste into the environment. We're also hoping, and I don't necessarily have a number of that on that is, but through a lot of our interventions, in particular in putting in place integrated waste management systems, we are creating new opportunities in terms of jobs.
Yep.
Right? We are creating opportunities for bringing people out of poverty, right? Or even creating more sustainable and secure incomes for families and households. Because what we do, especially when we're putting systems in place, these are systems that require literally human resources to manage them. whether that's at the collection level of waste from households, whether that's actual sorting of the waste that's being collected, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a whole, let's say, almost a machinery behind it. And that brings it back to, this is much more than plastic waste in the environment. If we can create a business model to it, not only will it be sustainable, but you will have much bigger and much more positive impact on society than just, if I can put it in that way, plastic waste. And so the agenda is complex, the agenda is interesting, we are optimistic and we are positive, and we believe with our member companies, with that commitment that we are seeing, that passion that drives them, and with an expansion in our partnership, both with the private sector and other actors, we can make a true difference and put an end to plastic waste in the environment in our lifetime.
Well, that's a great thing to conclude it with.
You guys, that hour flew by. We got through 9 of the 20 or so questions from the audience. We really appreciate you guys taking the time. We know you guys are busy. And I think, we got a lot out of it. So we're going to share back this recording to different markets, Asia, Europe, so they can see it. And we'll be, giving back the answers to the questions that we answered online as well. So thank you, Jacob, so much for your time, Saeed, as always. And we look forward to making a difference and hopefully doing something like this very soon.
Excellent. Thank you very much for the opportunity. Thanks a lot, Saeed, as well.
Thanks, audience.
Thank you, Jacob. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.